if I told you that toxic relationships stem from the toxic relationship that you have with yourself? And once we heal ourselves, that version of us will not allow toxicity into our life. Well, I didn't understand this until I went through quite a few messed up relationships, including a 12-year-long domestic violent relationship. So I want to share with you in this episode a little bit about my journeys in relationships. I want to talk to you a little bit about how I was before I got into these relationships and what called them into my reality, as well as what was needed of me in order to get out of these relationships. I also want to end and wrap this whole thing up with kind of how the internal world will reflect outside of us and especially in our relationships, but just in general. Welcome to Awaken with Lexy, the podcast. I'm Lexy, your host, and I'm so excited and grateful that you're here joining me today. If you're new here, this podcast is all around having real, raw conversations to help you on your journey. Whether you're in the highs or the lows or somewhere in between, there's a little something for everybody in this. All right, let's go ahead and jump into this. I want to start way back when. Let's talk about the first relationship I got into. In middle school, I was kind of like the ugly duckling. I was kind of like the ugly duckling. And in high school, as soon as that summer between middle school and high school, I got pretty, right? Like I lost my baby fat, I just became way prettier. I dressed more girly. I kind of did like a whole 360 of my look. And so I became the pretty girl. And then all the guys wanted to date me. I had my first boyfriend in 9th grade, and it was almost like too much for me. Like he wanted to spend every waking minute with me and talk to me all the time and just like hang out. Where prior to that, where I came from, right, was I wasn't getting the love I needed from my parents, right? So I didn't fully understand what that was like to have somebody be obsessed with you. And it was honestly just too much for me. So we ended that relationship. And a little bit later, a few months later, I got with a senior. So here I'm a freshman. He's a senior. He has all the cool friends. He's in like this little car crew. And now I'm his girlfriend. And so that transition was like, now I'm cool. And now, because you know how it is in 9th grade, like you care about how you look and you care what people think about you and all that stupid thing, those stupid things that don't really matter. That's kind of where I was, right? So I get into this relationship with him and, it's cool. Like he's taking me on dates because he has a car and we're hanging out all the time and it's super fun, right? Like it's just a fun relationship. And then he's actually the one who his friends ended up knowing that my grandparents weren't going to be in town and ended up raping me. So that was a very traumatic ending, if you will, to that relationship. Now, when that relationship ended, like really, really intensely compounded the understanding that I can't trust a man, that men were going to use me and then throw me out. And that narrative or that understanding, because again, my dad wasn't there. So here I am not having a dad and having brothers that looked at me as if I had everything because I lived with my grandparents that had more money than my mom and dad did. When I looked at them like, oh my God, you have my parents, what I would do to be with you guys. So I constantly had males around me that were either no good for me, being mean to me, or just not in my life. So I didn't fully have an understanding of what it's supposed to look like to be with a guy and how is a guy supposed to treat you. All of that is what we learned from our dad. And being my dad wasn't there to show me these things, and my grandfather tried, but again, I wanted it from my dad. It skewed my vision on what it looks like to have a good partner. I had no idea, right? I had no idea. And then this situation happens where I'm like, damn, you really cannot trust men out here. Like this is what men are going to be. And because of that situation, I got so angry. And like I shared in my first podcast, I did turn to drugs at this point, and I started using crystal, and I had an addiction that needed to be fulfilled. So I started dating a guy who was a drug dealer so I could get my drugs. And so when we started dating, in the back of my mind, I'm like, oh man, guys are no good, basically, right? Like you can't trust a guy. So I went in already knowing like, don't go there, basically. Don't do it. Don't fall in love. Like, just don't do it. And we were together for a little bit, but again, it wasn't really a relationship. Like what our relationship consists of was him gone for a week on a bender while he's selling drugs. Then he'll come to my house and crash out for 3 days while I help his customers, if you will, right? So it wasn't really a relationship. And in return, I had an unlimited amount of supply. So for me, being able to have that much readily available to me allowed me to really forget my whole life. So I enjoyed that part of it, right? Like I enjoyed what he was in my life as far as giving me something to forget and to just be numb, and all that really mattered was the next mission, right? Like that's all that mattered. Like where are we gonna bust the next mission? What's it gonna look like? Like that was all that I was worried about. I was, in reality now, retrospect, very present. Like there was nothing bad, anything. It was numb, right? Like I was just numb, but I was just there in the moment looking at what's to come next. So that relationship, the whole time, like I knew, Lexy, this is not good. Like you should not be doing this. Like you shouldn't be doing drugs. Because again, I lost my mom to being on drugs, right? And it's the same drug as far as that goes, right? So I always knew like, hey, this wasn't it. Like we shouldn't be doing drugs. We shouldn't be in this partnership. But it was nice to be numb. It was nice not having to really process my life up to that point. Spiritually, at this time in my life, it was very dark. I had so many sleep paralysis, like I can't even count. Anytime I would fall asleep, I would have a sleep paralysis. So for those of you that don't know, it's basically when you're like in between the wake and the sleep phase, and you can feel like spirits holding you, or you can hear spirit. You can basically you're in between two worlds. So anything that is around you that is of spiritual anything, it's there. Like you are at easy access for them. And me being such an open channel and trying to suppress this and being, sleep deprived and all of that, it just made me a very easy target for the dark to try and get me. And I remember thinking at this point, like I could feel a tug of war. Now as I understand, it was like my higher self like trying to pull me out of that world, as like the dark was like, don't let her turn good, because if she turns good, we can't use her anymore. And again, I was such a big light that of course the dark wanted to capitalize on me. Thankfully, my higher self didn't allow that to happen. So as I'm like going through this phase of my life, and I know it's not good, and here I am like having these crazy spiritual experiences and still trying to suppress them. I think the turning point in that was there was one day, and I remember I get a knock on the door, and it's a lady that we both knew. It was one of his customers. And I opened the door and I'm like, what's up? She's like, hey, is he here? And I'm like, no, but what are you doing? Like, why are you here? And who is this? She had brought a guy that he owed money to. Now I knew he was going down to Mexico to get drugs and crossing them over illegally and then distributing them here. And I could clearly see that this was somebody that, was from Mexico. And I'm like, all right, like, Lexy, now you're bringing not so good things to your front door. Now, granted, customers coming to the front door wasn't a big deal. Granted, like at that time, I wasn't doing great things, but for whatever reason, that situation, I knew that it was like, oh girl, you done did it now. Like, what are you doing? Like, not only are you putting yourself at risk, which I didn't really care, right? Like when you're living the streets, you don't care if you die. Like you're oblivious to that. But I didn't want anything to happen to any of my family, right? So I'm like, all right, girl, like we got to get out of this situation. So I end up getting out of that relationship. And then very shortly after, I end up getting locked up. And I remember sitting in juvenile hall thinking like, well, hey, Lexy, you said you needed something big to happen for you to change. Maybe this is it. And so I get out and I get on house arrest. I had an ankle bracelet on, so all I could do is just go to school and any program that the court said I had to go to. Other than that, I had to be at my house. And at this time, I was still running the streets. Like I remember walking home and to go get high because I just tested and I knew my PO wouldn't test me for a little bit. So I was walking home to get high, and I kicked it with one side and then I lived on the other, and I ended up getting down that day, which mind you, like if a cop were to roll up and we are fighting and I have an ankle bracelet, I'm gone. Like, I'm back in again, And so I was still dabbling in the streets, and it was still very much a big part of me. I was still using, but again, in my heart, I'm like, oh, Lexy, we need something more than this. Like, this is not what we want our life to be. And now, in retrospect, now that I'm thinking, it probably was my higher self being like, yo, girl, like, this ain't it. Like, we got to get out of this. At that point, I meet the father of my children. So here I am, like, knowing I want something different, but not really knowing how to go about doing that. So I meet this guy at a party, like literally day one that I get my ankle bracelet cut off. I go to a party that night and he's there. And I knew him from school. We had a class together, and he was actually a friend to the Connect. And so I knew him, right? Like, I knew of him. And he was different than who I was hanging out with, right? So before this, I was hanging out with like homeboys, right? Where it's just a different breed. And so he was different. I want to say better, just different, right? Like, he was funny and he was light and like lighthearted, and it was just, I guess, refreshing because it was something different than what I was used to and like around. And I never wanted to get with any of the homeboys. I didn't want to be one of those girls, right? Like, I didn't want to be looked at in that way. So I never messed with any of like the homeboys. So again, it was just a different kind of person, right? So we start dating, and he's like, all right, you need to stop doing crystal. You need to stop kicking in the streets. You need to stop hanging out with these people, which in that moment, I'm like, oh, he really cares. Look, he's trying to better me. He's trying to get me away from this situation, which he was, right? And I am grateful for that, right? Because it really helped me get away from the streets fully, which was exactly what I had asked for, right? Asked, and it was delivered. Now, this relationship, looking back now, it was definitely a karmic relationship. So with soulmates, before really my understanding, right? I thought there was only really one soulmate. There isn't. There's like different levels to soulmates, right? And some soulmates come into your life to inflict pain and to make you grow and to force you to evolve. That is a soulmate, right? And you'll have that same connection. Like, oh, it was like when we met, it was like magic. You're going to have that same feeling. But the reality is they're there to help teach you some shit, not to help love you and not to help get you out of the shit. So I had it confused, right? And so I was in this relationship, which I should have known looking back because my mom and him had the same birthday. So I should have put 2 and 2 together, but whatever. A little late now. So we start dating, and, we're in like the honeymoon phase, and here he is like helping me, and, it's great. It's magical. His family loved me. His mom like took me under her wing and started like teaching me things that, women need to know, which I didn't have any of that, right? So I'm like, oh my God, this is great. I love this. After the honeymoon stage is over, that's when like the abuse and the mental manipulation and the emotional manipulation began. So it's a very slow process to get somebody entwined in a domestic violent relationship. Definitely a narcissist, which means like he was the center of the world. And if he was not the center of my world, there would be an issue. But he wanted to run it. He wanted to run my life and run everything around it to his liking and what he wanted to do. So after the honeymoon stage is over, every weekend, like clockwork, he would go out. Before he would go out, he'd be like, we're not together. Make up some reason why we're not together. So whatever I do is whatever I want to do. And then he would do his thing, whatever that looked like, which means like I found open condoms. I've literally seen him with other women. Basically anything that he wanted to do, he did. Because again, we weren't together. Come Sunday morning, like clockwork, he would come to my house and he'd be like, I'm so sorry. I don't know why I'm doing this. I love you. I want to be with you. I see my life with you, which maybe he thought was true. But the manipulation aspect began at that moment, because what was happening is he would make me feel like I was less than, like I was not good. Like he would tell me things about like why he wants to be with other women and all these things that were just so bad. But it started to chip away at my self-esteem, which my self-esteem was already jacked up, right? So it was internally, I already had no self-esteem. So he was just reflecting back to me where I was internally, right? Like I had really low self-esteem. He was reflecting that back to me of like, hey, look how low your self-esteem is. I'm gonna go do this and you're gonna take me back. Because again, I felt less than already. So I can't blame him, right? Like I allowed it because of where I was, unknowingly, of course. But there is an aspect where accountability does need to take place in that moment, right? Like I allowed this to happen for whatever reason. You know, I am grateful now that I'm out of it and like I've got to this place. I am grateful for it. But it doesn't take away from the fact of how painful that part of my life really was. So cycle continued for a while. Maybe like a year after that, maybe a little bit more, was the first time that he actually hit me. So he was drinking with my brother. My brother leaves and I come back and he was in a rage. He was drunk, he was angry, and he just socked me in my face and my lip, busted my lip open. And the next morning he woke up, and I remember that night, right? Like, so he busts my face open, he knocks out because he's intoxicated. I remember being so afraid, so in disbelief would probably be the best word. I was just in disbelief that he actually hit me like that. I couldn't believe it. And here we are at my grandparents' house, so I can't leave. I can't go anywhere. I'm just stuck, right? I'm stuck here in my room in that fight or flight, like fear that I was in. He wakes up the next morning and obviously the love bomb begins, right? Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I don't know why I did that. I don't know what got into me. Where he was raging because of the weekend before, he didn't like that I was upset at it. And mind you, we weren't even talking about it. Like it wasn't even, he just thought about it and reacted. So he love bombs me like I've never been love bombed before. And I'm like, okay. He's like, it was an accident, all that. So I accept it. Again, reflecting back to me my low self-worth that I had. And at that time there, the love bomb part of these kind of relationships are, I think now, looking back, as well as the clients that I've helped, I think the love bombing aspect is really what drives women to stay in domestic violent relationships. Because it feels so good, right? Because you're in such a low emotionally, mentally, right? So in your brain is like on overload of how low you are. Now, there's a lot of hormones that are being released when you are in those valleys. And then we go so high up because we're so low. Or even if, let's say baseline is here and we drop down to like here, right? Baseline's here, we drop to here. When you get even here, a little bit above baseline, it feels like such a big difference. Because again, you were in such a low, but it's not anything unusual. It's not anything crazy, but in our minds and how we are processing it, because again, we are receiving a love bomb after a valley, it feels really good, right? And so we get used to this over and over and over again, where that high is ultimately what we're chasing, right? So when I had did my deep dive around this, I could recognize how I went from addicted to drugs, to addicted to these hormone highs and lows, the fight or flight. And it's still something that I have to personally be very mindful of, because we get used to it. And it's something that is so natural and so normal. And the love bomb feels so good in this really weird way, right? That it makes you want to stay subconsciously, very not consciously. Consciously, I knew girl, what are we doing here? But I couldn't move. There was no movement. I couldn't get out of that situation. So if you do know someone that is in a relationship like that, I would just say support them, because again, there's a lot going on, from how people get into those relationships to what's happening in the relationship that's making people stay. So if you do know someone, just be gentle with them, I guess is the best way, and just be there for them. It's not going to make sense to you unless you've gone through the situation yourself. And even if you've gone through the situation, now looking at it, I'm like, oh my God, please don't do that. But again, you're stuck until you're not stuck anymore. So fast forward to we have our daughter. At this point in our life, he was addicted to opiates because he had hurt his back and they gave him Norcos, and then that just spiraled out of control. So he was addicted to opiates, and he had been addicted for a while. And so I had watched him go from being great, like cloud nine when he was high, to literally like so sick, like throwing up, body shakes, bad. It was just very, very bad, right? So I have watched him go through this cycle of up and down, when he was high, when he didn't have any. And obviously I was there through it all, right? Like I was trying to support him and being loyal to the wrong person, which again is another thing that we should probably get into. But again, being loyal to the wrong person and trying to be the ride or die, right? Like trying to be that ride or die, which again, coming from the streets, it's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to be loyal, right? It's just what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to be the ride or die chick. But again, it was just the wrong person. It was the wrong person that I was doing this with. I mean, those are great qualities and they should be in every relationship, but with the right person, your ride or die is not going to be having to deal with somebody who's withdrawing from opiates. So at this time, we have our daughter and she becomes my whole world. My whole world. Like I knew from a very young age I wanted to be a mommy and I wanted to do it right because I didn't have a mommy. So I knew like I would take it so serious, and I was really excited to be a mom. Now, when I became a mom, what that meant for him was he was no longer the center of my world. And when that dynamic happens, it is like a clawing of you to try to get you to refocus yourself to them being the center of your world, which no, what the fuck? No, that's not what it's supposed to be like. And so when I had my daughter, that situation happened. So he was getting more aggressive. He was getting more angry. He was, like choking me and pushing me and those kind of things. And I wanted to take time off. So I had took time off to be with my daughter. At this time, we moved in with his parents. I was only working one job at the time. And when I had her, I took, I want to say like 3 or 4 months off. He started working full time to help his mom with like $100 or something so small so he could take care of that so I could just be with my baby. I didn't care. I wanted to be with my baby even if it was under his mom's roof. That was fine for me because I had my baby. At that point, because again, he was clawing and trying to really like hold on to me and make me the center of the world, he had to do something big, right? So at that point, it was my birthday. My daughter was like 5 months old, and he decides to go sleep with somebody on my birthday night. Like literally my birthday night, he is sleeping with somebody else. So obviously I'm like devastated, heartbroken, like what the hell? Right? It was a big reaction is what he was trying to get, and he got it. So I packed up my stuff, and me and my daughter, we moved in with my parents. Now mind you, all I wanted to do was be with my parents, right? All I wanted to do was live with my mom and dad since before I can remember. And here I am living with my mom and dad, obviously not the circumstances in which I wanted, but nevertheless, I was living with my parents. So as I'm living with my parents, I was probably there for, I don't know, maybe 2 weeks or something. It is not what I expected to be. There was a void in me that I was trying to fill by being there that will never ever be filled, right? No matter what. That void was me trying to be number one in my life, right? So here I am thinking that I need to be with my parents to fill that void. Here I am thinking I need to be a mom to fill that void. Here I am thinking I need the love from this guy that treats me like shit to fill that void. Reality is that void did not get filled until I filled it, until I became my dream person, until I fell in love with myself. So I'm at my parents and I'm very aware, like, yo, this void is still here. He calls me. I want to see Amaya. I'm like, okay. He calls me back again, and I can tell that he's sick, right? And again, he didn't have any opiates, so I knew that he was sick. He was coming down, and it was rough. Like I could hear it in his voice how rough it was. So he begins to love bomb me. I'm so sorry. I'll never do it again. I'm going to get off these. I'm going to change. Whoop-de-whoop-de-whoop, the whole thing. Reel me back in. Because again, that void wasn't being filled. So I'm like, okay, maybe this isn't what I need. Maybe I need something else. So I went back to this toxic relationship. He was okay for a little bit, right? Like he did better for a little bit. But I still had the void. And so we stayed together. And again, it was good for a little bit and was back to what it was before of like, hitting me, pushing me, choking me, all of that stuff. Really toxic environment to raise kids in. But again, I had that void. So we ended up having 2 more kids. When I had my son, I knew immediately after I had my son, like, we're done. Almost like, for those of you that understand like soul contracts, like it was almost like a soul contract that we were supposed to be together until I had my son. And then from there, we were not supposed to be together anymore. Like, I was very aware that this is over. I just didn't understand how I was going to get out of this. And on his side, right, like he was becoming aware of like I was slipping, right? Like he could feel that I wasn't getting mad anymore. I didn't care what he was doing. Like I was just like, whatever. Because again, I already knew, I was already mentally trying to like pull myself out of this relationship. But as you pull yourself out, what happens with these kind of people is they hold on tighter and they want to like pull you in and like reel you in. And him, I didn't give him any ammo to get angry, and I didn't give him any ammo to like hurt me or anything like that. So again, he was holding on for dear life. So he was really good, and he was doing what he was supposed to, and being super supportive, and being there for our kids, and doing all of that stuff, right? To try to hold on to me. So he ends up bringing this new guy around. As soon as he walked through the door, that same feeling, right? The soulmate, like instant connection was felt. And it was felt so strongly that he even felt it. His parents were there. They even felt it. Like it was a very strong, like almost like when you see in the movies where like the wind goes and like blows somebody away. Like that's literally how it felt, right? Where it was like, where I'm like, oh my God, like this is so shocking to me. And I knew it. I'm like, okay, this is weird. We're just going to see how this plays out. So he starts hanging around and he's into spirituality. And at this point, I already had my past life regression, but he's showing me a part of me that I never realized was there. And it was the part that was lovable, the part that was appreciated. I had someone that I thought cared about me and like just cared about me, just me, like nothing else, nothing more, just like me. So in those moments, it really helped me build my self-esteem up so that I could eventually leave this situation. So if you listen to the last podcast, or actually the first podcast, I talk a little bit about how like twin flame journey and all that stuff. So as that understanding kind of like gets on my radar, I'm like, okay, well, this makes sense. All the little things check off. So I start creating this fantasy of what I think this guy is. Now, at this time, my higher self is online. You know, she's connecting with me. I'm connecting with her. And I'm such a hopeless romantic that and I want love so freaking bad, which obviously like with my upbringing and stuff like that, I get why, right? But she used that for her advantage to get me to move, right? So she made me believe that this guy was my twin flame, which again, I understand now, right? Like I'm grateful that happened because I needed something to get me out of a relationship that I was going absolutely nowhere in. So I started believing this, right? Of like, he's your twin, he's your twin, he's your twin. Which while I'm believing this, the theory in the twin flame journey, right, is heal yourself and you get to be with your twin, right? Like that's like the narrative that's out there. So as I'm understanding this, I'm healing myself and I'm healing myself. And then finally I go to Shasta and I get the strength to leave that relationship. When I went up to Shasta, that's where like the higher self like really made herself known of like, this is your higher self. At this time before that, I thought it was just like my spiritual team and like, or my ancestors or whatever, not necessarily my higher self. So when my higher self was like, I'm the one that you're connecting with. I was like, okay, I get it. I trust, let's go. So getting out of that relationship with the help of him, with the help of this guy, which was a fantasy, which we'll get into in the next few episodes. I think it's the next episode or the episode after that around twin flame. But because of that, you know, I was able to fully get out of this relationship. Now, like I said earlier, when you're when you're getting out of these kind of relationships and the people know that there is nothing else there, it brings out the ugliest version of them. And it was extremely scary after I left him. It was him stealing my key, breaking into my house, breaking into my room while I'm sleeping with the kids. Came to my house like super drunk, threatened to kill himself, he like stabbed up my couch. Like it was getting very, very aggressive. And like I was seeing it escalate, right? Like it was just to like, oh, I want you back, to like, I'm gonna kill myself, to I'm now stabbing up your house. Like it progressively got worse. And that day when he stabbed up the couch, and unfortunately it was in front of one of my kids, like it was like, okay, wake up call. Like, we got to do something about this. So I ended up getting a restraining order. Thankfully, at the time, my dad was really close to me, so I was able to like have him kind of come in that night. Like, he stabbed at the couch. I ended up calling the cops. He leaves and he came back. Thankfully, my dad spent the night that night, where he's like, no, you need to get out of here, like, now. Thankfully, my dad was there that night. I don't know. I don't know where I would be right now if it wasn't for my dad staying that night. So really scary. So again, if you are in a domestic violent relationship or you do know somebody, the ending is always the scariest. And I did read something the other day where most women that are in domestic violent relationships, they actually get murdered and killed at the end when they are trying to get out, when they are desperately trying to get away. So that moment, right, like the ending of these relationships are pivotal. So if you know anybody, that is the time where the support system is vital. There's so many things out there, so many programs where women can get help to get out of these situations and them be protected. So the ending, be mindful, be cautious. I'm not saying that to put fear in you. You can still do it. You just, again, put your pieces in place before you actually get out. So all of my relationships, again, it really reflected to me and showed me how my internal world will be reflected in relationships. Like even my relationship now with Alex, right? It's the same thing. Like where we're at and what is coming up, it is always reflecting me. And a lot of times we like to point a finger of like, you're the problem. When in reality, if we point it back to ourselves, there is something there that we're not being aware of, that we have to become aware of. Because once we become aware of it, the situation dissolves. Now, when I say the internal world, what I'm speaking about is like your emotional body, your mental body. So your beliefs, your thought patterns, your emotions and how you process it, your regulating skills. All of those are what I'm talking about. So in your emotional and mental bodies are where you have the understanding and where it lies. That's where you have to go and look. That's where you have to clear things. That's where you have to clean up, if you will. It's in your emotional and mental bodies. So a lot of my healing was around like self-love and self-worth and like just really understanding like how dope I was. Because again, being in a relationship for that long, I lost myself. I didn't know who I was. I was just a shell, right, with a mask on that pretended to be happy, but inside I was dying. So not knowing who I was and not knowing like how great I was is again what kept me in that relationship for way too long. And then once I got out of it, I understood like, yo girl, you're really dope. Like on a human level, on a soul level, like you're badass. Like any man would be so lucky to have you. That's where those shifts start to change. That's where the relationship with myself is in love, right? Like I'm in love with myself. I'm not chasing for love outside of me anymore. I have all the love I need. I don't need any more. I want a love, but I don't need it. I'm full by myself. And that's where we have to get before we start to date. And it's so unfortunate that as young girls, we're not taught that, unfortunately. We're taught like, be the good housewife and make sure you take care of the kids and take care of your husband and all of these little fairy tales where the prince comes in and rescues you. That's not real. Like we have to love ourselves so deeply that no man with any bullshit or any toxicity can even get in. Like, no, I love myself too much to let that in. Fortunately, I didn't have that. So it's definitely something that I focus with my daughters of like really helping them understand self-love. And it's a battle, right? Like I had 3 kids when I was in that domestic violent relationship. So I am having to do extra work, if you will, of like trying to navigate that and understand it so that I could better support my daughters going through it. So it's real interesting how timing works, right? So today, actually, this day that I'm recording this podcast, I had to go to court and see the father of my children. We're in the middle of a long custody battle, child support, all that fun stuff. And it was really interesting how, of course, like universe sets things up and then me trying to find meaning in everything. That's just the way I am, how it is. So today, just kind of break it down a little bit on what the interaction was like today and how it tripped me out and how it made me really, really proud of myself and where I'm at. So we're here in court and for those of you that have never gone, like they have all the cases and everybody hears everybody's case. So there's this lady and this guy that are in the middle of their case. And I just noticed how nice she is, like how sweet this lady is. Like he was making a ton of money. She only wanted a little bit of money, was very like agreeable and just like That's fine. That's fine. That's fine. And I'm just like, oh my God, she's so nice. Like, here she is taking care of her daughter, barely getting anything. And I could totally feel like her, just like the love that she had, right? Like, she just has such a big heart and she just wants to be loved and loved correctly. But the guy that was sitting next to her just kept taking. And he had no problem taking. And the judge would ask a question and he would say what benefited him, and ask another question, say what benefited him. And it was just so heartbreaking to see this, as like he's taking, and she's just giving. And in that moment, I'm like, oh my God, Lexy, this is literally how you were. You would just give. And he would take, and it not be an issue. And that even happened after we were done. Like, I remember shortly after we were done, he still had his claws in me. I was still afraid of him. I still felt bad for him. I still understood. And so I still allowed him to use those manipulative tactics, right? Manipulative tactics. Like, he was still using those on me, and I was oblivious to them. And thankfully, my partner came into my life and he's like, nope, this ain't gonna happen no more. He's super protective of me. And as soon as he's seen the situation, he's like, absolutely not. This is not happening. Not when I'm here. Absolutely not. And so he's really like created this like safe space for me, and like kind of put me in a box, if you will, of like protection, which is I'm so grateful for that. And I don't move the same way anymore, right? Like, I'm not here to be your friend. I'm not here to allow you to walk on me anymore. I'm not doing that anymore. I'm going to get what my kids deserve. And it's like, I have this fight in me now, because again, like, it's like that picture I'm sure you guys have seen where there's like a girl lion and she's like walking, and it says like, don't mess with her because of the king that's behind her. That's literally how I feel, right? Where it's like, I'm not afraid anymore. And if he is ever so stupid to do anything, it would just be all bad. But again, I feel protected, right? And so he doesn't have those same abilities as this lady, or he doesn't have the same power as like what this dynamic was. It becomes our turn, and, he's trying to lower it, and, I'm standing strong of like, no, I think this is fair. We go outside and he's like, we need to talk about this. And I'm like, well, that's what the judge is here for. I don't want to talk about this because we have to wait for paperwork to come out. I'm like, I don't want to talk about this with you. It's what the judge is here for. The judge is going to decide what is fair. We don't need to talk about this. And then he throws in there, we are better than that. And I was like, whoa, like, I was literally taken back by what he said, because I'm like, wait a minute, hold up, we're better than that? You don't show up for your kids when you're supposed to. You're not paying any child support. I'm taking care of my kids. Like, I'm good. And so it was so interesting to see this crazy projection being put on me that I'm not good enough, when in reality, that's him feeling like he's not good enough because he's not there for his kids. And how I was able to like fully just like reject it. Like, in that moment, I was so proud of me. And again, it showed me how there are no more claws in me anymore. Like, I don't care anymore. You've hurt me and you continue to hurt my kids. I'm not Miss Nice anymore. Like, I'm going to fight for what's right. And so it's just such a beautiful transition, because again, before, I used to be like that lady. I used to be a yes ma'am and a yes sir, right? I'm just like, go with the flow and give and all of that. And it's just so beautiful to see me fully in my power. The reality is, I would not be here if it were not for him. I would not be this strong and this resilient and want to fight the fight and want to stand up for people who can't. Like, I literally wanted to go in there and like rescue this lady. Like, no, that's wrong. Like, I wanted to help her. Because again, that fighting spirit that is in me is because I've gone through this hell, right? Like, I've gone through it, and I know how unfair it is and how life is so hard sometimes. So it just gives me that fighting spirit. So although I share with you all of this like craziness, honestly, I'm in such a good place because of it. It doesn't bother me anymore. Like, I'm healing from it. My wounds no longer bleed anymore, right? Like, he has no control over me. He has no power over me. I'm free from that. Where not everybody has that opportunity, right? Like, not everybody gets that opportunity to heal themselves and to attract the partner. It's what gives me the drive to show up every day and to help as many humans as I possibly can. Because again, I know what it is to be there. And it's like that the wounded healer is what it's called, right? Where it's like somebody who's gone through it, who wished somebody was there with them. Like, I'm that somebody that I wish was there for me, right? And obviously I had to learn how to balance it, because it can't get out of balance. My healers know what I'm talking about. But that spirit comes from the pain, comes from me having to deal with all of these jacked up relationships. And then now I'm in a relationship that is beautiful and we are growing and, we want the best for each other. And of course we go through it still, right? Like we're not some perfect couple. That's not what relationships are meant to be. Relationships show you where you need to grow. Every single one of my relationships showed me, you'll grow. You're not there yet. You're needing to heal. You need to heal. You need to heal. That's all relationships are there for, right? It's to show us how we need to heal. So now that I'm in this relationship where, again, we're still healing, like I'm not perfect by any means. Every day is a struggle. I'm still growing. I'm still evolving. I'm still switching my beliefs, all of that, but again, I have a drive in me now because of what I've gone through. Well, thank you for joining me on this episode of Awaken with Lexy. I hope you guys got something from it, whether it just be inspiration or understanding, or maybe you can just send this to somebody who needs it. And if you're ready to deep dive on your own spiritual journey, please don't forget to subscribe to this podcast and also follow me on Awaken with Lexy on IG. That's where I'm going to be posting more content, more integratable stuff. So make sure you're following along there as well. And now this is week 3, I want to say, week 3 of this little deep dive that I'm doing into my story. So we got like 5 more left, but it's been so fun so far, and I can't wait to continue to share these stories with you and eventually soon get you guys on this podcast as well so we can start sharing some real raw stories. All right, well, that's it for now. I'll see you guys next time.